My kids think I'm cruel. Maybe they're right. But at my age, being kind is a dangerous luxury. Kindness leaves you open, and openness is an invitation to be used. I'm 74 years old. I've lived long enough to know the cost of weakness, and I refuse to pay it anymore. Every morning, I rise at 6, whether I have anywhere to go or not. 42 years of teaching history at Lancaster High School drilled discipline into me. Retirement hasn't changed that. And in a way, I'm grateful. It keeps me from becoming one of those elderly women who melt into a couch, blending into the TV until they vanish from the world. This morning started like every other. Tea brewed, toast popped, bills checked, routine followed with the precision of a clock. And then the phone rang. My son's name flashed across the screen. Denby. His voice, cheerful and too bright for 8 in the morning, sent an immediate warning through me. Denby. Good morning, Mom. The words themselves were harmless, but the tone betrayed him. I'd learned that long ago. Something's wrong. Is something wrong? I asked, cutting straight to it. Why does it always have to be wrong? There was a pause. I imagined him pressing the bridge of his nose, a nervous gesture lifted straight from his father. Finally he spoke. Adele and I. We were thinking of stopping by today. Adele, my daughter-in-law. Everyone calls her that, as if she were a pop star instead of a receptionist at a social support center. She always looks ready for a photo shoot, flawless makeup, perfectly styled hair, nails so precise they could be in a commercial. Her name suited her. Rare, pretentious, polished to the point of coldness. Tuesday, I reminded him. You work. She works. I have the day off. Adele too, I presume? Another pause. Then, the words that made my stomach tighten. We need to talk. About something. 45 years of motherhood had taught me that phrase was never good news. I agreed. Be here for lunch. I had downsized years ago, trading the sprawling 3-story Victorian mansion where Denby grew up for a smaller apartment in the city centre. It was easier, manageable, and left me close to everything I needed. Lancaster may not be a huge city, but it's not a village either. Its old streets and historic churches remind me of the weight of time. A comfort when life feels fleeting. I like to think problems shrink when seen against a 1,000-year-old castle by noon. Dinner was ready. Nothing fancy roast potatoes. Carrots, foods Denby loved as a boy. Not indulgence, but a subtle reminder of the mother who raised him. They arrived 20 minutes late, which was almost punctual for Adele. As usual, she looked like she had stepped off the cover of a glossy magazine. White blouse, tight skirt, heels clicking on the floor. Denby, in simple pants and a shirt, seemed almost dull by comparison, though he had inherited his father's handsome features and athletic build. Gwen, how good to see you, Adele said, her voice clipped but polite, each word measured. She insisted on using my first name, though I had repeatedly told her it wasn't necessary. I deliberately replied with, Hello, Adelaide, savouring the little sting of proper formality. Come in. Dinner's ready. We sat. Conversation was light, controlled, almost superficial. Denby spoke about a municipal planning initiative. Adele commented on difficulties at her workplace, clearly trying to display intelligence and charm. I listened quietly, my fork moving mechanically, waiting for the inevitable. Finally, dessert done, Denby cleared his throat. He glanced at Adele, seeking silent support. Mum, he said, unnaturally calm. We've had some financial difficulties. I raised a single eyebrow, silent, Patient. Nothing critical. He hurried on. Just temporary. Adele wants to change jobs. Her new position pays better. But in the meantime, I cut him off. How much? The number made me wince. Not for affordability, my pension and savings were sufficient, but for the sheer absurdity. A 45-year-old man asking his mother for money. For what, exactly? I asked, turning to Adele. She looked away, fingers tapping nervously. We need to cover bills until Adele's new position starts, Denby explained. A couple of months at most. I studied them. Shoulders tense, eyes avoiding mine. The nervous gestures, they weren't telling me everything. Denby, I said slowly, you have a steady paycheck. Adele works too. What happened to your money? Mum, he pleaded. Life's expensive. Mortgage, car. You don't have kids, I reminded him. Just the two of you. Where does it go? We maintain a certain standard, Adele said quickly, but her eyes betrayed the truth. I'm not giving you any money, I stated firmly. Denby's face fell. Always transparent, he never hid disappointment well. I can give you my credit card, I added, surprising even myself. Only for emergencies. A compromise. I had no issue with the funds, but cash in their hands meant zero control. The credit card at least allowed oversight. Thank you, Mom, Denby said, part relief, part shame. We'll pay back every penny. Adelaide nodded politely, but her eyes remained distant, calculating. I stood, signaling an end to the discussion. Now, tell me about your garden. Last time, you mentioned planting new roses. The remainder of the visit drifted into small talk weather. Gardening, nothing meaningful. Yet beneath each polite exchange, the tension lingered. Their motives were subtle but clear. Leverage, habit, and a quiet testing of boundaries. Months passed, I checked statements. Small purchases supermarket, gas repayments prompt. Then £300 at a women's clothing store. Denby called with an apology, promised reimbursement, which came. Similar incidents followed: restaurant bills, electronics, spa visits. Each time money returned, creating the illusion of honesty. A thin veneer of trust covering a creeping misuse. I thought of my husband Hubert, who would have scolded me for softness. Denby, impressionable and always seeking approval, had been moulded in subtle ways, first by his father, then increasingly by Adelaide. She steered him toward positions, purchases, and ambitions that were never necessary. Her double-barreled surname, alone Salo-Fernard, spoke of vanity and pretension. She had insisted upon it at their wedding, giving herself significance in her own eyes. When I watch them, it's clear. Their lives are orchestrated around desire, image and influence, not need or responsibility. 10 years into their marriage, I hoped for stability. Instead, I see constant pushing, subtle pressure for more, luxuries they cannot truly afford, all while maintaining an air of decency and charm. And still, I remain wary, aware of each gesture, each smile, each pause. I am 74. I have learned the cost of giving too freely. I have learned the price of trust. And yet, I navigate their presence with calm precision, knowing that kindness must be measured, even with family trips abroad, home renovations. Their needs were never ending. I didn't interfere. It was their life, their choice, until they came to me for money. Until they started using my credit card for their emergencies, which increasingly looked like whims. Was I being overly critical? Perhaps, but years of teaching history have taught me one thing. Human nature rarely changes. People repeat the same mistakes over and over, generation after generation. Denby was a weak child. He became a weak man. Adelaide always aspired to status and luxury. She will aspire to them for the rest of her life. And yet, I didn't take the card. Perhaps because of guilt. He wasn't a perfect mother. Far from it. Maybe because somewhere in the back of my mind, I wanted Denby to be happy. Even if his idea of happiness included indulging his wife's every whim. Or maybe it was just because I was lonely. Those occasional apology calls were one of the few ways I had regular contact with my son. Pathetic, isn't it? An older woman clinging to her son's financial dependence as a surrogate for a real relationship. But I wasn't complaining. I've lived long enough to know everyone has their own truth. And Averian does what they think is right under the circumstances. Denby and Adelaide saw fit to use my credit card. I saw fit to let them for the time being. There was that special tense silence in Denby and Adelaide's salon, Fernand's house, that comes after a long argument, when all the arguments have been exhausted, but no one has considered fiat. Denby sat at the kitchen table looking at the stack of bills. In front of him, Adelaide stood at the window, arms crossed over her chest, looking out over the perfectly trimmed lawn of their small garden. I don't know how we got to this point, Denby finally said, rubbing the bridge of his nose. We both work. We both have decent salaries. Don't start that again, Adelaide said without turning around. We've been talking about this for an hour. The mortgage, the bathroom renovation, the new car, their vacation in Italy, which we didn't have to take. Denby pointed out. Adelaide turned to him, her face contorted with indignation. Really? You're going to tell me about 2 weeks in Sorrento, when all our friends go to the Maldives in Thailand? Do you have any idea how I feel when Emily shows me pictures from their villa with a private pool and I can only brag about a standard room in a 3-star hotel? Emily and George earn twice as much as we do. Denby objected tiredly. We can't spend like them, and that's why I want to change jobs. Adelaide walked over to the table and leaned on it with her hands. I'll get 40% more in the private sector. We'll be able to pay off our loans and start living normally. Denby sighed. This conversation had been repeated for months. Adelaide was unhappy with her position at the social support center and was looking for a job with a private company. The problem was that the process was dragging on and the bills kept piling up. You know, I support your decision to change jobs, Hess said gently. But until that happens, we have to make it work. Maybe we should think about refinancing our mortgage and lose the favorable terms we have. She shook her head. No, that's stupid. We just need to hold out a little longer. Adelaide went to the refrigerator and pulled out a bottle of white wine. Denby watched in silence as she filled the glass. Her movements were polished, elegant. Everything about her was like that. It was that exquisite confidence that had attracted him 10 years ago when they'd first met at a Christmas party at the social support center. Adelaide Sallow had just started working there and had stood out immediately among the other staff, impeccably, dressed with perfect posture and a slightly haughty smile. Denby fell in love instantly. She seemed to him the embodiment of everything that was missing in his own life. Determination, ambition, style. Their marriage was a miracle to him that he still couldn't fully comprehend. Why had a woman like Adelaide chosen him, a humble, unassuming municipal clerk? It was a question that sometimes plagued him at night, making him question his own worth. Speaking of holding out a little longer, Adelaide took a sip of wine and looked at Denby with a wistful smile. Our wedding anniversary is in 2 weeks. Denby tensed. He remembered the anniversary, of course, but in the current financial situation, he had no idea how they could celebrate it. I think we should just have dinner at home this year, he suggested cautiously. I'll cook something special. We'll open some good wine. Adelaide's smile faded. 10 years of marriage. And you proposed to celebrate it at home. Her voice was skeet, but there was steel in it. Really, Denby? Adele, you see our bills? He pointed to the stack of papers. We just don't have money for a restaurant or a trip. We don't? What about your mother? Denby froze. He knew where she was going with this, and the thought disgusted him. We use her card too often as it is, he argued. I feel terrible every time, but we always get the money back, don't we? Adelaide came over and put her hand on his shoulder. It's just a temporary measure, like a line of credit. Mom gave us the card for emergencies, not for fun. 10 years of marriage isn't just for fun. Adelaide objects softly. It's an important date, and I want us to celebrate it properly. Just once, Denby. One special weekend. She leaned over and kissed his cheek, then his neck. Denby closed his eyes. Even after 10 years, her touch had power over him. What do you suggest? He asked, already knowing he'd lost. The Royal Lancaster. She breathed in his ear. The best. Hotel in town. Presidential suite. Champagne. Spa. Dinner at their Michelin-starred restaurant. It'll cost a fortune. Denby moaned. About 17,000, Adelaide said calmly. I've already found out. 17,000? He drew back, looking at her in amazement. Are you mad? That's less than your mother spends on charity every year. Adelaide interrupted. I saw her card statements when you checked the balance. £2,000. A month to some fund for the protection of historic buildings. 2 tens of thousands a year to old stones. And you say 17,000 for our anniversary is too much. Denby felt a prick of guilt. He had indeed noticed these regular transfers, but had never paid much attention to them. His mother had always been fascinated by history. It was her profession and passion. It's her money, Adele, he said quietly. She has the right to spend it, as she wishes, and we're entitled to one happy weekend every 10 years. Adelaide sank into the chair beside him. Look, I understand your doubts. I really do. But when was the last time we did something really special? When we felt untainted by the routine of surviving from paycheck to paycheck? Her eyes filled with tears, and Denby felt his resistance melt away. Adelaide rarely showed her vulnerability, and every time it broke his heart. I just want one weekend, she continued. One weekend where we can't forget about bills, about work, about not making enough money, or not being successful enough. I want to wake up in a nice room, order breakfast. In bed, feel important, at least for a little while. Denby took her hand. He knew he had to say no. Knew it was wrong to use his mother's card for such an extravagant expenditure. But when he looked into his wife's eyes, he saw in them the dreamy girl he'd fallen in love with 10 years ago, and he couldn't say no to her. All right, he gave in. But we'll get that money back. Every penny of it. Adelaide's face brightened, and she embraced him with sudden strength. Of course, we will. As soon as I get a new job, we'll pay off all the debts, both to the bank and to your mother. Denby hugged her back, trying to ignore the feeling of anxiety that settled somewhere in his chest. He loved Adelaide, loved her with all his heart. Sometimes he wondered if she was using that love as a weapon against him. I'll call the hotel tonight. Adelaide pulled away, her eyes glittering feverishly with excitement. We need to book a room in advance. They're always full on the weekends. Okay. Denby nodded. Just let's not tell Mom. Let's keep it between us. Of course, Adelaide agreed easily. It's our holiday, our little secret. She kissed him and walked quickly out of the kitchen, already pulling out her cell phone. Denby remained seated at the table, looking at the bills and feeling as if he had just sold his soul to the devil. That same day evening, Adelaide triumphantly announced that the room had been booked for the coming weekend. Not for their actual anniversary, which was in 2 weeks, but for the coming Friday and Saturday. Why so soon? Denby wondered. It thought we were going for the real anniversary. They're busy on the anniversary, Adelaide explained. Weddings, corporate parties. Besides, who cares? It's still a party. Denby nodded silently, though his gut told him it wasn't because the hotel was busy. Adelaide simply couldn't wait 2 weeks. She wanted her fairy tale immediately. The following days passed in a strange rhythm of anticipation and anxiety. Adelaide fluttered around the house, packing for their mini vacation, ordering a new dress and shoes for dinner at their restaurant. Denby watched her with a mixture of tenderness and concern. The evening before they left, as Adelaide took a bath, Denby sat in their bedroom holding his mother's credit card. He remembered the day Gwen had reluctantly handed it to him, her thin finger calloused from decades of writing with chalk on the blackboard, her penetrating gaze that read doubt and disappointment. Gwen Fernard had never been an easy person. Tough, straightforward, with high expectations and little patience for those who didn't meet them. Her relationship with her only son had always been complicated, a mixture of love, frustration, and perpetual attempts to remake him in her own image. When his father died, their relationship became even more strained. Hubert Fernard was the buffer between mother and son, the person who could soften the sharp edges of their interactions. Without him, they found themselves face to face with their differences, without a mediator or translator. Denby loved his mother, but he was also afraid of her judgment, her sharp tongue, her ability to make him feel like a failure. With one look, it wasted that fear that often drove him to do things he deep down thought were wrong, like using her credit card to pay for Adelaide's whims. And yet, was it really his fault? Hadn't Gwen raised him to be like this, dependent on approval, unable to stand firm on his positions? Hadn't she spent years undermining his self-confidence with her constant remarks and comparisons to his father? Denby sighed and put the card back in his wallet. Tomorrow he would use it to pay for the most expensive room at the Royal Lancaster. £17,000, a sum he and Adelaide couldn't afford, but a drop in the ocean for his mother with her substantial savings. It's on the aunts, he said to himself. We'll pay the money back as soon as Adele gets a new job. But deep down, he knew he was fooling himself. This wasn't the first time they'd misused Gwen's card, and it probably wouldn't be the last. They were deeper in debt than he'd even admitted to himself, and it was getting harder and harder to get out without help. That night, Denby lay awake for a long time, listening to Adelaide's steady breathing bees him. He was tormented by thoughts of tomorrow, of his mother's reaction if she found out, of what his life had become. A constant chase for status and things they couldn't afford. Maybe the worst part was the realization that he saw no way out of this vicious cycle. He was trapped between his love for Adelaide and her endless desires, between his duty to his mother and his fear of disappointing her, between what he wanted to be and what he had become. The golden cage he had built for himself. As Denby and Adelaide prepared for their luxurious weekend away, Gwen Fernard sat in her quiet apartment, poring over old photographs. It was her usual Friday night ritual. A glass of sherry, an album of family snapshots and memories of a life left behind. One of the photos was of her and Hubert on their honeymoon. 2 young smiling people against the backdrop of the Roman Colosseum. Gwyn ran her finger over her husband's face. 5 years had passed since his death, but the pain of Velas still felt like a fresh wound. Hubert Fernard had not been an easy man, reserved, sometimes harsh, with high standards and a low tolerance for stupidity. But he was honest and straightforward, qualities Gwen had always valued above all else. Their marriage was not like romantic stories from the movies. Rather, it was a partnership of 2 people who deeply respected each other and shared common values. Hubert was an engineer working on infrastructure projects all over England. He rarely spoke of his accomplishments, but Gwen knew that several bridges and roads existed because of his calculations and designs. Like her, he believed in creating something lasting that would be left behind. When Denby was born, Hubert was of age. They were both in their 40s. A late child, long awaited and loved, but perhaps overprotected. Gwen sometimes wondered if they spoiled him, if they protected him too much from the hardships of life. Hubert had always been stricter with his son than she had been. The boy must learn to stand on his own feet, he used to say. The world won't be kind to him just because he's our son. Gwen turned the scrapbookage. Denby and Adelaide's wedding was another important event in their family history. She remembered her first impression of her future daughter-in-law. Beautiful, elegant, but with a cold, calculating gaze that Gwen had noticed immediately. Hubert had been ill then, cancer slowly sapping his strength, but he had found the wisdom to caution his wife. "Stay out of it, Gwen." He said it's his choice, his life. "We've already done all we can," and she tried not to interfere. She really did. But watching her son slowly turn into a shadow of his ambitious wife was agonizing, as was seeing them living by him. Their means, trying to maintain a lifestyle they couldn't afford. Gwen put the album aside and walked over to the window. It was starting to rain outside. Typical English weather, grey and dank. She thought about the credit card Denby had given her, about the strange charges that had increased in recent months, about how her son always sounded guilty when he called with explanations. What did I miss in raising him? That question had haunted her for years. Where had she made a mistake that she had raised a man unable to resist pressure, whether from his parents or his wife? Maybe it was her own overbearing nature. Gwen knew she wasn't the easiest person to deal with. Demanding, critical, often impatient. Perhaps Denby was simply tired of resisting the strong women in his life, and had chosen the path of less resistance. Or maybe the reason was deeper in the way he and Hubert showed their love. Always with conditions, always with expectations. Well of you, but we want you to be better. We're proud of you, but you could do better. Gwen sighed and walked back to her chair. Tomorrow would be a normal Saturday. A trip to the market, maybe meeting a former colleague for a cup of tea, reading a book in the evening. The measured, predictable life of an elderly widow. Sometimes she missed the work, the energy of the classroom, the young minds she molded. Teaching history wasn't just a profession to her. It was a calling. She loved to see her students' eyes light up as they began to understand the connection between past and present as history came alive for them. Upon retiring 2 years ago, Gwen lost some of her identity. Sure, she still has friends, hobbies, and her charitable work with the Historic Building Preservation Foundation, but without the daily contact with her students, without the structure and purpose that the work provided, she felt a little lost. And perhaps that's why she focused too much on her son's life, on his mistakes, on his dependence on Adelaide, on the way he seemed to be adrift instead of actively building his life. If only Hubert were here, Gwen thought, but immediately cut herself short. It was pointless to guess what would have happened. Hubert was gone, and she had to cope on her own with loneliness, with worrying about her son, with her own aging. She picked up the album again and found a picture of Denby as a child, a smiling boy with a ball in his hands. Things had seemed simpler then. Back then, she still believed she could protect him from all the storms of life, set him on the right path, make him happy. Now, she knew it was an illusion. Each person chooses his own path, his own mistakes, his own joys. Even if that path leads to financial ruin because of his wife's exorbitant ambitions. Gwen closed the album and turned off the light. Tomorrow would be a new day. And as her experience as a historian had taught her, life always finds a way to surprise. Even when you think you know all its twists and turns. I hadn't planned on stopping by the Royal Lancaster that Saturday. In fact, I wasn't going to leave the house at all. The sky had been frowning since morning, threatening to rain. And at my age, walking in the rain is fraught with colds and sore joints. But Eleanor was relentless. "Gwen, I haven't seen you in almost 2 months," she insisted over the phone. "And I'm leaving for Edinburgh next week. It's our only chance to meet." Elena Berwick was a colleague of mine for 20 years. We taught history of same school. After retirement, unlike me, she didn't stay at home, but travelled the country, staying with many relatives and friends. She didn't come to Lancaster very often, and I couldn't refuse to see her. "Okay," I gave in. "Where do you want to meet?" "At the Royal Lancaster." Her voice sounded excited. "There's a new cafe in the lobby, and they say the cakes are delicious. My niece works in their accounting department, and she promised us a table overlooking the garden." I wrinkled my nose. The Royal Lancaster was the most expensive hotel in town, the place where celebrities and businessmen stayed. It wasn't that I couldn't afford a cup of tea in their cafe, but the atmosphere, all the ostentatious luxury, the designer sofas and cushions, the staff who smiled like it was in their contract. It all seemed artificial and uncomfortable to me. But Eleanor was so excited about the upcoming meeting that I didn't argue. 2 o'clock, she suggested. 2 o'clock, I agreed and hung up. I chose me best tweed suit for the meeting, navy blue with a faint plaid. Hubert had given it to me for my 60th birthday, and despite my age, it still fit perfectly. I completed the outfit with a pearl brooch and comfortable but elegant low-heeled shoes. Looking at myself in the mirror, I thought I looked decent for the Royal Lancaster, not luxurious like some of its visitors, but with that quiet dignity that I thought was worth more than any designer outfit. I left house at the beginning of the second. My apartment was a 15-minute walk from the hotel, but I opted to leave early. I hate being late and in a hurry. Besides, the day wasn't as rainy as I'd feared. The sky was still overcast, but it hadn't started to rain. On the way, I thought about the upcoming meeting. Eleanor and I had always found common ground despite our different personalities. She was expansive, outgoing, while I preferred restraint. She loved modern history. I loved ancient history. But we were united by a passion for teaching and a respect for knowledge. The Royal Lancaster towered above the surrounding buildings as a symbol of luxury and status. Its neoclassical facade with its columns and pediment was clearly intended to impress, and admittedly it succeeded. I walked up the wide marble steps to the main entrance. A livery doorman opened the door with a bow that seemed excessive. Inside, the hotel was even more impressive. High stucco ceilings, marble floors, crystal chandeliers that must have cost a fortune. The lobby was spacious with seating areas and a small cafe in the far corner. I spotted Eleanor right away. She was sitting at a table by the window overlooking the hotel's manicured garden. Her grey hair was arranged in an elegant style, and a smile shone on her face. I made my way toward her, maneuvering between the chairs and couches, when out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a familiar figure at the front desk. I slowed my step, taking a closer look. A tall man in a grey suit stood with his back to me, but something in his posture, in the tilt of his head, was painfully familiar. Beside him stood a woman in a tight cream dress, her dark hair gathered in an elegant bun. She was saying something animatedly to the receptionist, gesturing as if she were explaining something very important. I stopped as if I'd hit an invisible wall. It was Denby and Adelaide, my son and his wife, at the Royal Lancaster, at their front desk. My heart clenched with a premonition of something bad. What were they doing here? Checking into a hotel in their own city? That seemed ridiculous. They have a house only 20 minutes away from here. I retreat bend a column, not wanting them to notice me. Not that I was spying on my son. I just wanted to understand the situation before jumping to conclusions. Receptionist typed something on the computer and then handed them 2 key cards. Presidential suite on the top floor. His words came to me. The best suite in our hotel. Congratulations on your wedding anniversary. I froze. The presidential suite. The one I'd heard cost several £1,000s a night. The one where royalty and world celebrities stay. My bewilderment was replaced by suspicion. Denby was a mid-level municipal employee. Adelaidean administrator at a social support centre. Neither of these positions could provide them with this level of luxury. They had recently complained of financial difficulties. At that moment, my phone vibrated in my bag. I pulled it out, still watching my son and daughter-in-law, who were now walking toward the elevators, accompanied by Thepata carrying their luggage. A bank notice popped up on the screen. 17,000 sterling has been debited from my card account. Pay Royal Lancaster Hotel. I felt the blood drain from my face. Pound 17,000 from my card. The card I'd entrusted to Denby for emergencies. It was like a blow to the head. A betrayal so blatant, so shameless that for a moment I lost the ability to breathe. All those little accidental spending sprees, they always returned. It was just a test, a preparation for the main deception. I leaned against the pillar, feeling weak in my knees. My own son, the man I'd given birth to, raised, always tried to help, used me, stole from me, lied to my face. Gwen, are you all right? Eleanor was standing next to me, a look of concern on her face. I didn't see her approach. Yeah, I breathed out, trying to pull myself together. It's just a little dizzy. It'll pass. You look pale. She took my hand. Come and sit down. I'll order you some tea. I let her take me to a table, still trying to comprehend what had happened. Elena was saying something to the waiter, but he didn't. Listen. One thing kept going through my mind. 17,000 on a hotel room without my permission. Are you sure you're all right? Ella leaned across the table to me. Should we call a doctor? No. I shook my head. I'm fine. It's just unexpected news. I showed her the phone with the notification. Elena frowned, staring at the screen through her reading glasses. 17,000. Her eyebrows went up. Oh my God, Gwen. Is this the bank's mistake? If only, I grinned bitterly. I've just seen that money being spent by my son and his wife on a presidential suite in this very hotel. Elena was shocked into silence. She'd known Denby since he was a child, watched him grow up, even looked after him sometimes when I was late at work. But how? She finally squeezed out. Why do they need a room here? They have a house. It's their wedding anniversary. I repeated the receptionist's words. Apparently, they're celebrating in style on me. The waiter brought tea, and I automatically thanked him. When he left, Eleanor spoke again, lowering her voice. Did you give them your card? For emergencies, I poured the tea, noticing that my hand was trembling slightly. They were talking about financial difficulties, about Adelaide wanting to change jobs. I believed them. What are you going to do? That was a good question. My first instinct was to go up to the goddamn presidential suite and tell them what I thought of this use of my trust, but something was stopping me. I don't know. I answered honestly. Part of me wants an immediate confrontation. The other part, I prefer a more subtle approach. Eleanor finished for me. She always understood me well. I nodded, feeling the initial shock give way to cold fury. A simple revelation would have been too predictable. Yes, Denby would be embarrassed. Adelaide would apologize in her sugary, sweet voice. They would promise to return the money, and nothing would change. They'll continue to think of me as an app machine to be used for their whims. No, what was needed here was something more educational, a lesson they won't soon forget. Does your niece have good connections at the hotel? I asked Eleanor, sipping my tea. My thoughts were beginning to line up in a certain direction. Good enough. She nodded. What single quote sat on your mind? I wasn't sure yet, I answered, though I was already forming a plan in my head. But I'm going to need some help and maybe a little information about what's included in the presidential suite program. Eleanor looked at me carefully. You're not going to do anything illegal, are you? Of course not. I smiled. And that smile must not have looked too friendly. I just want to show my son and his wife real hospitality is all about. Elena didn't look convinced, but she pulled out her cell phone nonetheless. I'll call Margaret, she said, referring to her niece. She should be at the hotel right now. While Eleanor was on the phone, I browsed the Royal Lancaster's website on my smartphone. The presidential suite included 2 bedrooms, living room, dining room, kitchenette, 2 bathrooms, and a spacious terrace overlooking the city. The package included access to the spa, breakfast in the room, dinner at the hotel restaurant, and even a personal butler. 17,000 for 2 days of sick luxury. Money I could have spent on charity on a trip to Italy. I'd long planned on a new kitchen in my apartment. But no, it went so Adele could feel like a princess for the weekend. Margaret will be here soon, Eleanor informed her, ending the conversation. She's in the office, literally a stone's throw from here. Less than 5 minutes later, a young woman in a strict business suit approached our table. Margaret Beerwick looked like her aunt when she was young. The same bright eyes, the same confident posture. I'd met her several times at school functions when she was a teenager. Mrs. Fernard. She smiled warmly at me. Aunt Eleanor said you have some problem with our hotel guests. Have a seat, dear. I pointed to a vacant chair. The story is rather delicate. I summarized the situation without getting into emotional details. Margaret listened with professional attention without interrupting. This is serious, she said when I was finished. Using someone else's credit card without authorization. Technically, it's fraud. We could call the police. No. I shook my head. I don't want to take this to the police. This is me son. No matter what, I just want to, teach him a lesson. And what kind of lesson do you mean? Margaret asked with a slight weariness. Nothing illegal, I assure you. I smiled slightly. I just want to change their idea of a luxury vacation. Change their idea of a luxury vacation. For the next half hour, Eleanor, Margaret and I worked out a plan. It became more and more detailed the minute, and I must admit, more and more gloating. But didn't I deserve a little gloating after such a betrayal? Margaret proved to be an invaluable. As an accounting clerk, she had access to the hotel system and could seal the details of Denby and Adelaide's reservations. The booked dinner at their restaurant for 8 o'clock tonight, she reported, looking up the information on her tablet. To champagne on arrival, flowers, the complete romantic package. Great, I nodded. Then we have time to get ready. You said the presidential suite includes butler service. Yes, Margaret confirmed. Anani's on duty tonight. He's one of our best employees. Can he help us? Margaret thought for a moment. Maybe if you explained the situation, and if it's not something that could harm the guests or the hotel's reputation. No harm, I assured him. Just some minor, adjustments to their stay. Margaret nodded and Madison calls. Anthony agreed to meet us in the hotel office space in 10 minutes. While we waited, I began to think through the details of my plan. It had to be subtle enough to not look like blatant revenge, yet effective enough to get my message across. I wanted Denby and Adelaide to realize not only the financial, but also the moral side of what they were doing. Do you really want to go for it? Eleanor asked quietly as Margaret stepped back to fetch more tea. It could ruin your relationship with Denby forever. Hadn't what he'd done already ruined it? I objected. Eleanor, he stole $17,000 from me. Used my card, which I'd given him for an emergency to pay for a luxury vacation with his wife. If that's not a betrayal of trust, then what is? Eleanor sighed. You're right, of course. Just be careful. Sometimes revenge can hit the one taking revenge harder than the one being avenged. I nodded silently. Of course, Eleanor was right. Revenge is rarely truly satisfying. But what I had planned wasn't so much revenge as a lesson. Harsh, yes, but necessary. Margaret entered with a new kettle and informed us that Anthony was waiting for us. We walked through the service entrance into a small office where we were greeted by a tall, middle-aged man in an impeccable suit. Mrs. Bernard. He bowed politely. Margaret told me about your situation. Please accept my sincere apologies for the fact that our hotel, however unwittingly, has become part of this misunderstanding. Thank you, Anthony. I appreciated his diplomacy and thank you for agreeing to talk to me. I have an idea how to resolve this situation, but I'm going to need your help. I'm listening. He pointed to the chairs around the small table. I outlined my plan, trying to sound calm and businesslike, even though I was seething with anger and resentment inside. Anthony listened attentively, sometimes nodding, sometimes frowning. It is a rather unusual request, he said when I was done. But technically there's nothing about it that violates hotel policy or the law. And given the circumstances, I realize I'm asking for a personal favor, I said. And I'm willing to compensate for any additional expense or inconvenience. That won't be necessary. Anthony smiled slightly. I think your request is reasonable under the circumstances. Besides, it might serve as an educational moment for your relatives. We discussed the details and he was impressed with how quickly Anthony had grasped the situation and offered some ideas of his own that made my plan even more effective. Everything will be ready by the time they return from their restaurant, he assured me, about 10 p.m. if they kept to their standard dinner schedule. Great. I felt a surge of energy I hadn't felt in a long time. No need to figure out the restaurant. Margaret looked at Anthony. I know someone at the restaurant, she said. Let me make another call. While Margaret was on the phone, Eleanor took my hand. Are you sure you want to go this far? She asked. Wouldn't it be enough just to talk to them? I've tried talking to them, Eleanor, I replied. About financial responsibility, about living within their means. They nodded, agreed, and then went and spent £17,000 on a weekend in a hotel. No, a simpler conversation wouldn't do it. Margaret returned with a smile. It's all arranged, she said. Chef Ricardo will personally see to it that your request is fulfilled. Thank you, dear. I felt a deep gratitude for these people who, allowing me, were willing to help in such a delicate situation. You don't know how much it means to me. It's nothing, Margaret said with a wave of her hand. Besides, Ricardo is thrilled with your idea. He said it would be one of the most memorable meals he'd ever made. We all laughed, and I felt the tension of the last hour release a little. The plan was ready. All the details were agreed upon, and the performers were in place. Now all we had to do was wait and imagine the looks on Denby and Adelaide's faces when they realized that their perfect romantic weekend had taken an unexpected turn. Would you like something stronger than tea while we wait? Anthony suggested. We have a great bar for the staff. I'd love to, I agreed, feeling I'd earned a small reward. For my ingenuity, a nice glass of cherry would be nice. We returned to the cave and Eleanor ordered our drinks. I sat looking out the window at the hotel garden and thought about how strangely life had turned. Just this morning, I was just an older woman heading out for tea with a friend. Now, I was the architect of an elaborate revenge on Mjorn's son. But, did I have a choice? Let them continue to use me? Pretend it never happened? No. Sometimes you have to stand firm even if it hurts, especially when it hurts. Hubert would approve of my actions. I was sure of it, Dot. He always said people had to be taught to take responsibility for their actions. And today, Denby and Adelaide would learn a lesson they would remember for a long time. With that thought, I picked up my glass of cherry and took a sip, feeling the warmth spread through my body. My revenge wasn't just a reaction to the deception. It was an elaborate plan to show my ungrateful relatives the true cost of their deed, and I couldn't wait to put it into action. At precisely 8 o'clock, Denby and Adelaide entered the restaurant of the Royal Lancaster Hotel. They looked like a couple out of a glossy magazine. He in a dark tailored suit. She in a champagne-cold evening gown that I wash cost a month's salary for a regular employee. I watched them from the small staff room where Anthony had kindly escorted me. From here, the entire restaurant room was visible through a one-way mirror. Your son and his wife have just arrived, Anthony informed me, standing next to me. Everything is ready as planned. I nodded, not taking my eyes off Denby and Adelaide. While being escorted to their table by the maitre d' Adelaide was looking around the room with undisguised pleasure, while Denby looked a little tense, as if he didn't quite believe he had the right to be in a place like this. Well, he'd soon have every reason to worry. Is Gerald here yet? I asked Anthony, referring to my old friend who had agreed to play a key role in my plan. Yeah, he's waiting at the bar. Anthony nodded. He arrived 20 minutes ago, looking rather impressive. I smiled. Gerald Berwick, Eleanor's brother, was a successful businessman and investor, owner of several real estate companies. At 68, he maintained an imposing figure and a presence that made people take notice of him. We had met years ago at a fundraiser and had maintained a friendly relationship ever since. When I called him asking for his help, he agreed immediately without even hearing the details. Anything for you, Gwen? He said. Only later did I learn that he'd travelled all the way from Manchester, postponing an important meeting. The waiter brought Denby and Adelaide a menu and they began to study it. I saw Adelaide point to something, probably the most expensive dish. Denby nodded with a smile. At that moment, he reminded me of myself as a child receiving a long-awaited gift. It's time to begin, I said to Anthony. Please giveth maitre d' a sign. Anthony nodded and made the call. A few minutes later, the maitre d' approached Denby and Adelaide's table with a bottle of champagne and a bucket of ice. Compliments of the hotel, I heard him say through the surveillance system. In honour of your wedding anniversary. How nice, Adelaide smiled. Thank you very much. The maitre opened the bottle, with professional elegance filled 2 glasses and left. Denby raised his glass. To 10 years together, he said, and here's to many years to come. They clinkered glasses and took a sip each. Adelaide wrinkled her nose. Strange, she said, looking at the glass. Some unusual flavour for champagne. Denby frowned too, taking another sip. Yes, indeed. Maybe it's a special kind. Apparently. So Adelaide shrugged and set the glass aside. Let's order some wine for dinner. Something Italian. I smiled. The first part of that plan worked. The champagne was perfectly normal, but with a small amount of flavourless food colouring added, which was supposed to show up in about half an hour. It was completely harmless, but quite noticeable. Denby and Adelaide placed their order, and soon their appetizers were brought to them. I watched them eat, talk, laugh carefree, Sure, they were having the perfect romantic evening on my dime. Time for Act 2, I said to Anthony. He made their call again, and a minute later I saw Gerald heading toward Denby and Adelaide's table, elegant, with a perfectly trimmed grey beard and an impeccable suit. He looked exactly how a successful investor should look. Minus Mr. Fernard. Gerald stopped at their table. I apologize for disturbing you, but I was told you were here. And Gerald Berwick. Perhaps you've heard of me. Denby looked puzzled, but quickly pulled himself together. I'm afraid not, Mr. Berwick. What can I do for you? I'm an investor, Gerald said confidently with a slight smile. I specialize in real estate and urban development. I was told about your project to renovate a historic neighborhood in Lancaster, and I'm very interested. I watched Denby's face change from bewilderment to surprise, and then to poorly concealed delight. Adelaide's face lit up with excitement. My project, Denby interjected. You mean the proposal to restore the Victorian buildings along the waterfront? It was an idea Denby often shared in the family circle. An ambitious plan to renovate abandoned buildings in the old part of town. Noon took him seriously, including his superiors at the municipality. Nevertheless, he had put together a detailed presentation that no one wanted to see. Exactly, Gerald nodded. A very promising concept. I have some free time now. Would you like to discuss a possible collaboration? I could join you for dinner if you don't mind. Of course we don't mind, Adelaide exclaimed before Denby could even open his mouth. We'd very glad to, Mr. Berwick. Gerald seated himself at their table, called the waiter, and ordered a bottle of expensive red wine. Then he began a casual conversation about real estate investments and Lancaster's prospects. I saw Denby literally blossom under Gerald's attention. He began to talk about his project with a passion I hadn't seen from him in years. Adelaide sat beside him, beaming with happiness, obviously imagining how this meeting would change their financial situation. Act 3, I whispered to Anthony, and made the call again. A few minutes later, the maitre d' approached their table. Again, I'm sorry to disturb you, Mrs. Sallow-Fernard, he addressed Adelaide. But there's a gentleman at the bar asking for you. He says it's urgent. Adelaide frowned, clearly unhappy at being interrupted from a promising conversation. Who is it? She asked. He introduced himself as Mr. Quinton from Premium Credit. The maitre d' replied. I watched Adelaide's face change from annoyance to shock, and then to poorly concealed fear. Yeah, I'll be right there, she said, giving Denby and Gerald a strained smile. I'm sorry, it's work-related. I'll be quick. She got up and headed for the bar where an anathema of my plan was waiting for her. Peter, Margaret's friend, who had agreed to play the part of the lone Campana representative. I turned my attention to the bar where another surveillance camera was pointed. Adelaide approached a tall man in a strict suit who stood up to meet her. Mrs. Sallow-Fernard, he asked. My name is Robert Quinton, and I represent Premium Credit. We've had a problem with your account. What kind of problem? Adelaide's voice sounded irritated, but I could see her fidgeting with her purse. I always pay on time. Not exactly. Peter pulled out a file folder. You've been in arrears for the last 3 months. We've sent notices by mail and email, but we haven't heard back. There must be some mistake. Adelaide lowered her voice, glancing nervously at the table where Denby was, engaged in a passionate conversation with Gerald. I don't have any debts. I'm afraid you do. Peter opened the folder and showed her the documents. A credit card in your name with a limit of £10,000, fully maxed out. No monthly payments for the last 3 months. Adelaide's face went pale. She grabbed the documents and began frantically going through them. This is a private matter, she finally squeezed out. I'll deal with it tomorrow. Now is not a good time. You understand? Peter nodded. But our company has to notify you that if you didn't pay within 7 days, we'll have to start collection proceedings through the courts. This may affect your credit history. And all right. All right. Adelaide interrupted him. I understand. Could you please be quiet? I have an important meeting. Of course, Peter lowered his voice. Here's my card. Please contact me as soon as possible to settle this matter. Adelaide took the business card and quickly stashed it in her purse. Then she walked back to the table trying to look casual, although her smile was strained. Is everything all right? Denby asked. Yes, just a misunderstanding with one of the customers. Adelaide brushed it off. Nothing serious. She took a big sip of wine, obviously trying to calm down. Gerald continued talking about the Denby project, as if he hadn't noticed her condition. Act 4, I said to Anthony, and he picked up the phone again. At this point I noticed that Denby and Adelaide's faces were beginning to take on a strange bluish hue. The food colouring in the champagne had begun to take effect. It was barely noticeable yet, but it was becoming more obvious by the minute. Waiter came to their table with the main courses, a perfectly cooked steak for Denby, an exquisite fish dish for Adelaide, and a risotto with truffles for Gerald. They continued their conversation while enjoying their meal, although I could see that Adelaide was now distracted, her thoughts clearly revolving around the unexpected meeting with the loan company representative. Soon, it was time for the culmination of my plan. The invited guests, close friends and relatives of Denby and Adelaide began to arrive at the restaurant. Margaret met them at the entrance and explained the situation before escorting them to a separate room adjacent to the restaurant. They were all told it was a surprise for their wedding anniversary. Gerald looked at his watch and turned to Denby. You know, Mr. Fernand, I'm so impressed with your project that I'd like to introduce you to some of my colleagues. They should be here at the hotel right now. Perhaps we could meet them after dinner. That would be wonderful. Denby couldn't hide his delight. The bluish tint of his face was becoming more and more noticeable, but didn't seem to realize it. Great. Gerald smiled. I suggest we move to the conference room after dessert. It will be more convenient to discuss the details there. Adelaide looked worried, but she tried not to show it. Her face, too, had taken on a noticeable bluish tint, which combined with her pour from stress to create an almost ghostly effect. I need to use the ladies' room, she said, standing up. Excuse me. Us left, Gerald leaned over to Denby and said quietly, You know, Mr. Fernand, I have a proposition. I'm prepared to invest a considerable sum in your project. Say about £100,000 to start with. Denby's eyes widened with surprise and delight. That's incredibly generous, Mr. Beerwick. I didn't know what to say, but there is one condition, Gerald continued. I need complete financial transparency. I need to be sure that my investment is for that project and not for personal expenses. Of course, absolutely. Denby agreed hastily. I can provide all the necessary guarantees, including your current financial situation. Gerald looked directly into Denby's eyes. No hidden debts, honest business practices. Denby hesitated for a moment, but nodded. Yes, of course. We're transparent. Good. Gerald smiled. Then we'll move on to dessert and then meet my colleagues. Adelaide returned, her face even bluer than before. She had clearly tried to flush the paint down the toilet, but was unsuccessful. Nevertheless, she pretended that everything was fine, although you could see in her eyes that she was panicking. Is something wrong, darling? Denby asked with concern. There's nothing wrong, she retorted. It's just bad lighting. Gerald coughed delicately. You know, you both have faces that are a little bluish. Maybe an allergic reaction to something. Denby and Adelaide stared at each other, noticing the change in skin color for the first time. Adelaide grabbed her purse and pulled out a small mirror, looked into it, and gasped. "Oh my God," she exclaimed. "What is this?" "Don't worry," Gerald said calmly. "I'm sure it's only temporary. Perhaps it's something in the food or drink. Let's get on with our evening, and I'm sure it will soon pass." They reluctantly agreed, although Adelaide looked as if she was ready to cry from humiliation. Dessert was brought. Exquisite chocolatemisses for all three of them. After dessert, Gerald stood up. "Well, I feel ready. Let's move to the conference room. My colleagues should be waiting for us by now." Denby and Adelaide followed him, both with blue faces, creating a strange picture that attracted the attention of other diners in the restaurant. I quickly left the observation room and headed to the conference room to meet them there. When Gerald opened the conference room doors, Denby and Adelaide froze on their threshold. Waiting for them inside were about 20 people, their closest friends, co-workers, Adelaide's relatives, and me standing in the center of the room. Surprise. And then there was a deafening silence as they saw the blue faces off the Seabrants. "Mum." Denby looked at me with shock and incomprehension. "What? What's going on?" "Good evening, Denby," I smiled. "Adelaide, I thought I'd surprise you on your wedding anniversary. After all, I paid for it." Denby's face turned even bluer, but now with shame and horror. Adelaide stood like a statue beside him. "Let me explain," I went on, addressing everyone present. "This afternoon, I happened to see my son and his wife checking into the presidential suite of this hotel. At the same moment, a notification came to my phone that £17,000 had been charged on my credit card, which I had given to Denby for an emergency." A shocked whisper ran through the room. I saw some of Denby and Adelaide's friends exchanging credulous glances, and I thought, I continued, if they're spending my money to celebrate their anniversary, then I have a right to be a part of that celebration, and to invite all of you to share in the moment. "Mum, it's not what you think," Denby started, but I raised me hand, stopping him. "Please don't lie, Denby. Don't make it worse. I saw you use my card. I saw the charge notice." I turned to Gerald. "Mr. Barrick, would you mind telling everyone who you really are?" Gerald nodded and turned to the crowd. "I'm not an investor interested in Mr. Fernard's project. I'm a friend of his mother's who agreed to help her teach her son and daughter-in-law a lesson." Denby's face contorted with humiliation and anger. Adelaide beside him looked as if she were about to faint. "One more thing," I added, pulling out a folder. "While you were enjoying your luxurious vacation at my expense, I did a little research on your finances, and I found something interesting." I opened the folder and pulled out the documents. "Adelaide, do you know that your husband does a secret 20,000 loan that he took out to cover your previous debts?" Itten to Denby. "Did you know that your wife has a secret credit card with a £10,000 debt that she hasn't told you about?" They looked at each other with shock and disbelief. Their friends and family watched in silence as the drama unfolded, not knowing how to react. How? How do you know that?" Denby squeezed it out. "I have my sources," I replied. "But that's not the point. It's that you're both living a lie. Lying to each other. Lying to me. Lying to everyone around you. Pretending to be happy when you're not." Adelaide suddenly burst into tears, her blue face contorted in a grimace of despair. "I didn't mean to," she exclaimed. "I just wanted to be like everybody else. To have nice things. To go to nice places at someone else's expense. I finished for her at the expense of my son who is now up to his eyeballs in debt because of your ambition. At my expense because you've decided that my credit card is your ticket to luxury. I looked around at everyone here. I didn't invite you here today to publicly humiliate Denby and Adelaide, although I admit I get some satisfaction from that. I have invited you here to show you the reality behind the facade of their perfect lives. Because it is you, their friends and family, who have often been the unwitting cause of their financial troubles, their desire to fit in, to keep up, to have what you have, even if they can't afford it. There was dead silence in the room. No one knew what to say. Denby stared at the floor, unable to lift his eyes. Adelaide continued tokri, smearing makeup across her blue face. Now, if you'll excuse. M.E. I said, heading for the exit. My mission is accomplished. Enjoy your evening. Champagne and hors d'oeuvres are on me. One last gift from me. I walked past Denby and Adelaide, who were frozen, but stopped at the door and turned around. And yes, the blue will wear off your faces in a day or two. It's just harmless food coloring, unlike the consequences of your financial fraud, which will haunt you much longer. With those words, I left the conference room, leaving them alone with the truth and the consequences of my actions. My revenge was complete, and it was even sweeter than I expected. The 3 days after my revenge passed in a strange silence I expected. Calls, angry messages, attempts to explain myself, but my phone was silent. Only Eleanor called the next day to see how I was feeling. Are you all right, Gwen? Her voice sounded concerned. After yesterday, I was fine, I answered, and it was true. I felt surprisingly calm, as if an old weight had fallen from Miss Holder's. How's Gerald? Oh, he's thrilled, Eleanor laughed. He said it was better than any theatrical performance. By the way, he said to tell you that if you ever need help with anything, you can count on him. Tell him I said thank you, I said. It wouldn't they have been possible without him? After talking to Eleanor, I sat by the window with a cup of tea, watching the life off the street below. A normal Sunday afternoon. People walking their dogs, couples holding hands, children running around, their parents. Normal life, normal families, something I never had and will never have again. I felt no regret for my actions, not one bit. Denby and Adelaide deserved what they got. They had abused my trust, used me, lied to my face. My revenge was just painful. Yes, but not cruel. I didn't physically harm them. I didn't destroy their careers. I didn't publicly shame them outside their circle of loved ones. I simply showed them the truth about themselves, about each other, about the consequences of their actions. And yet there was pain, not from what I had done, but from having to do it. The realization that my only son, my flesh and flesh, the man I had born, given birth to, raised, was capable of such a betrayal. On the 4th day, the silence was broken. The doorbell rang at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. I wasn't expecting guests, and for a moment I froze, wondering whether to ignore the call, but curiosity got the better of me. Denby stood on the doorstep, pale, gaunt, with dark circles under his eyes. His face still had a faint bluish tint, especially on his cheekbones. Mother, he said harassingly, can I come in? I stepped back silently, letting him into the apartment. He walked into the living room and stopped in the middle of the room, not knowing where to put himself. Sit down, I pointed to a chair. He sat down, hunched over with his hands folded in his lap like a delinquent schoolboy. I sat across from him, keeping my face calm and impenetrable. I came to apologize, Debbie began, looking past me. What I did, it's unforgivable, I know that. And yet here you are looking for forgiveness, I remarked. No, not forgiveness. He finally looked me in the eye. I don't expect you to forgive me. I just want you to know that I realize how awful what I did was. I remained silent, waiting for him to continue. Denby swallowed nervously. We'll get the money back, he said. All 17,000. I've already arranged to refinance the mortgage. It'll take a few weeks, but it's not about the money, Denby, I interrupted. It's never been about the money. I know. He lowered his head. It's about trust. It's that I betrayed him. Betrayed you. I looked at my son and saw him as the little boy who had once broken a vase and tearfully admitted it. Only now he had broken something far more precious. Our relationship, my faith in him. Where is Adelaide? I asked. Denby wrinkled his nose as, if in physical pain, she'd gone to her sisters. We need time to think. After the other night, after everything that came up, I nodded, not surprising. The public exposure of their lies to each other must have taken a serious toll on their marriage. I didn't know about her debts, Denby continued. A Booth's secret credit cards, neither did she know about the loan I'd taken out to cover our previous expenses. We were both hiding the truth from each other. And from me, I added. And from you, he showed. We were in a vicious circle of lies and I don't know how we got there. It started out small loans we planned to pay back quickly. A desire to impress our friends, to fit a certain lifestyle. A lifestyle you couldn't afford, I finished for him. Yes, he grinned bitterly. The classic story of living beyond your means. Getting into debt, lying to cover it up, and then the lease built up like a snowball, and you can't stop. I looked at him without sympathy. Maybe he was remorseful, but that didn't change what had happened. Why did you come, Denby? I asked you straight out. What do you want from me? He looked up at me, and I could see the desperation in his eyes. I don't know. He admitted, understanding maybe, even though I don't deserve even that. Maybe I just wanted to see you to make sure you were okay after everything. After you stole from, my eyebrow went up. Or after I gave you and Adelaide a public exposure. Both. He lowered his head. Mother, I know things have always been difficult between us. You've always been demanding, and I've always been afraid of not living up to your expectations. Is that why you decided to steal 17,000 from me? I couldn't contain my sarcasm. An interesting way of resolving family troubles. No, of course not. He shook his head. It's not an excuse, just context. I've always felt I wasn't good enough for you and Father. No matter what I did, it was never enough. And when I met Adele, she admired me, saw something in me that I didn't see in myself. It was like a breath of fresh air. I listened to him, trying to figure out where he was being sincere and where he was being manipulative. Denby had always been a master of excuses, of shifting responsibility onto others. Even now, when he admitted his guilt, he was implicitly accusing me of being too strict a mother. Adelaide saw you as a source of funding for her ambitions, I said harshly. She pushed you to live beyond your means, and you let her because you were afraid of losing her. And when your debts became unsustainable, you decided to use me. It was her idea, Denby said quietly, to use your card to pay for the hotel, but I agreed. And that makes me no less guilty. At least you're honest about it. There was a pause. Outside the window, the rain began to fall, teardrops drumming on the glass, creating a background noise that filled the heavy silence between us. What now, Mom? Denby finally asked. What's going to happen to us? To our relationship? I stared at him for a long moment, wondering what to answer. Part of me, the maternal part, wanted to forgive him, to hug him, to tell him everything would be okay. But the other part, the rational protective part, knew that would be a mistake. Some things can't be fixed with a simple, I'm sorry. I don't know, Denby, I answered honestly. Right now, I don't see a way forward for us. You've broken my trust and I'm not sure it can be rebuilt. His face contorted in pain, but he nodded. I understand, perfectly in time. Time doesn't always heal, I interrupted. Sometimes it just teaches us to live with the pain. I'll learn to live with the realization that me son was capable of such betrayal. And you'll learn to live with the consequences of your actions. Denby sat with his head down. His holder slumped under the weight of my words. He looked so broken that for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy. But only for a moment. I wish I could say it would never happen again, he said quietly. But you won't believe me. And you'd be right too. Yes, I agreed, I wouldn't. He stood up, realizing the conversation was over. I'll send you the money as soon as I get the refinance, Hesed, heading for the door. I'll call from time to time. Check on you. Don't bother. I stood up too. We both know those calls will only be for your comfort, not mine. He stopped at Theodore, turning to me. Is it really that irreparable? There was desperation in his voice. Can't you? No, Denby, I said firmly. I can't. And I don't want to. At me age, I don't have the time or energy for a toxic relationship, even if it is with my own son. He looked at me with such desperation that for a moment, I thought he was going to cry. But Denby held back, nodded, and walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. I went back into the living room and sank into a chair, feeling strangely empty, not grief, not anger, not even the satisfaction of revenge, just emptiness. It was as if a part of me had died along with the faith in my son that I had nurtured so long and carefully, despite his flaws. The next day I called my lawyer, Francis Allen. We had known each other for over 30 years. He had handled Hubert's and my legal affairs, helping with the deed to the house, and after my husband's death, with the reissuance of all the deeds to me. Francis, I need to change my will, I said without preamble. Is it something serious, Gwen? I could hear the concern in his voice. You could say that. When can you see me? For you,